Welcome to another edition of 7 and 7, where we will explore the 7 readings of this week's Torah portion in just about 7 minutes. This week's Torah portion is called the portion of Korach, and it's the story of the rebellion of a man named Korach, who gathers a few well-known rabble-rousers together with 250 other prestigious members of the community, and they essentially accuse Moses and Aaron of power grabbing. The Torah suggests that they specifically were upset about the fact that Aaron was the high priest. In response to their claims, Moses proposes a challenge where each one of the people involved in this discussion would bring incense before God, and whoever God would accept, that would be the person who would be worthy of being the high priest. Moses then tries to convince the people not to agree to it because he knows it's going to end badly. It's interesting to note that the people who joined Korach, some of the leaders, the Torah tells us, were from the tribe of Reuven, and that's noteworthy because the tribe of Reuven, was camped right near the tribe that Korach was a member of, and so it turns out that, in fact, the very fact that they were neighbors negatively influenced them. And from here comes the Talmudic expression, Ol l'rasha v'ol l'shcheno, woe is to the wicked and woe is to their neighbors. And so it's important that we always remember not just to work on our personal lives, but to also keep good company. The second reading of this week's Torah portion continues with the story of the challenge. Moses pleads with God not to accept the incense of these individuals who would be coming. And Korach goes around making jokes and laughing at the expense of Moses. And it comes the morning and God's glory appears. That's the end of the second reading. It's fascinating to note that according to Jewish tradition, we do not name our children after the wicked. And that is simply because we don't want to preserve their memory. It's interesting to note that this week's Torah portion nonetheless has the name of someone who was not a good person. And this week's Torah portion is called Korach, which seems to go contrary to this idea of memorializing the names of the wicked. So one possible explanation here is that it's actually, while Korach, of course, was mistaken, something positive is occurring here, and that is that Korach is not satisfied with someone else being the high priest. He wants to be the high priest. And so, of course, that's contrary to God's will, but the very concept, the desire of wanting to be better, of wanting to be the best, is always something that's an ideal that we should keep in mind. The third reading tells us that God wants to destroy the Jewish people because of their association with the camp of Korach. Moses and Aaron convince him to punish just Korach and those who were actually a part of the rebellion, the 250 leaders. And that's exactly what happens in the well-known story that the earth opened up and swallowed Korach, and a fire broke out and burnt and destroyed the 250 leaders who had joined him. God then instructs Moses to tell the priests to take the pans that those rebels had used to burn incense and to melt it down and attach it to the altar so that people will remember that story when they walk into the tabernacle. And it's fascinating to note that God would be so interested in preserving something that had been done by these individuals. But perhaps the lesson here is that since ultimately there had been some good intent, God values just even a small amount of good intent in an action is tremendously valuable to God. So certainly when you talk about individuals who are much greater than just a pan of metal that had a mitzvah done with it, and that we have so much good hidden inside of us, how much God must value our actions and our behaviors, even if it's only a small amount of good intention. God says that Moses and Aaron should separate themselves from the camp of the Jewish people, and God is going to make a plague. God then sends out a plague, and many thousands of people are dying. Moses right away instructs Aaron to go bring a pan of incense and to stand between the living and the dead, and the plague stops. It's interesting to note that the same incense that had been used in the previous section of the story and that ultimately led to the death of the 250 people is now being used to help make the Jewish people stop dying, and it's used as a power of life. And so there's a powerful idea here to consider that there's nothing that's inherently killing or making people live. It's all about what God wants from it. And in our own personal lives, there's almost nothing that's truly good and truly bad. It's really what we make of it, and if we try to apply God's will to our actions and our behaviors, and then we can really elevate the test of the staffs. God tells Moses to take 12 staffs from each one of the tribes and write their names on it, and to take Aaron's staff on behalf of the tribe of Levi and to write his name on it. They should put all the staffs in the tabernacle, and the next morning, the one that blossoms will be the one that God chose as the high priest. And of course, the next morning, Aaron's has flowers and buds and almonds. And this is further proof that Aaron is, in fact, the high priest. There's an interesting lesson here. It turns out there was actually 3 types of growths that happened on Aaron's stick. And the mystics point out that although God could have sufficed with just one, that would have been enough to prove Aaron's validity as the high priest. The reason why there was 3 was in continuation with Korach's issue of the high priest. God wanted to say that although he had settled it by showing that in fact the high priests and the priests were elevated and they were chosen specifically for that job, nonetheless all 3 types of Jews, Kohanim, Leviim, and Yisraelim, the Kohens, the Levites, and the Israelites, are actually all equally important, and that's why all 3 are represented by the 3 types of growth, to show that as a community we need to have everyone. God tells Moses to take Aaron's staff and put it in the tabernacle as a permanent remembrance of this story. The Jewish people tell Moses that they fear that they may by mistake enter the tabernacle, and we learned a few weeks ago that somebody who enters the tabernacle with the wrong intentions gets punished. And so God tells Moses to tell the Levites that they would have an additional job of guarding the parameters of the tabernacle to make sure that nobody comes in accidentally. The Torah then tells us that the Jewish people are instructed to offer many types of gifts to the priests. The first portions of many fruits, the first parts of the best of the wine, of oil. They need to redeem their firstborns, and many other mitzvahs. And then finally, God tells Aaron that his children will not have a inheritance in the land of Israel, and that rather that God himself will be their inheritance. And while many of these mitzvahs of the gifts to the priests do not apply today, the Rebbe explains here an interesting idea, that the idea of the gifts is that we give the best. We give the first sections, the first portions of what we create, we give to the priest and we give to God. And so really when somebody spends their day, even if they're mostly working or mostly not studying Torah and praying, but at least the best part of our day, when we're the sharpest, when we're the most awake, most involved, should be dedicated to praying and to studying Torah and doing any other mitzvahs. And God tells the Levites that they too will not receive a portion in the land of Israel, and instead will be receiving 1/10 of all the Jewish people's crops. And once they receive that 10%, they have to actually give a portion of it to the priests. Here too, the Torah tells us that the Levites have to offer the priests the best part of the portion that they receive. And Maimonides points out that from here we learn that anytime that somebody does a mitzvah, it should be done with the best of their possessions. So if you're going to build a synagogue, if you're going to give food or clothing to someone who's hungry or needy, give them nice things, make them feel really good about it. Our mitzvah should really be done with the best of what we have, not just to get the mitzvah done with, but really to be involved and really give it our best. Wishing you a wonderful week and a Shabbat Shalom.